Hey guys, Rudi here with another CSSE1001 and 7030 Python tutorial. So this week we're going to be looking at the week 10 tutorial, right? Which is more on graphical user interfaces. Okay, so basically last week, if you're not too sure what a GUI is, definitely check out the week 9 video from last week. We go through the sort of basics there, how to set up a GUI and some really sort of basic button commands and that sort of thing. This week we're going to be going a bit further and kind of looking at how an actual sort of proper complete app could look. It's worth noting that this is a really good starting point for assignment 3, right? So if everything in assignment 3 is super confusing, you're really not sure how to approach stuff in general, definitely have a look at this tutorial that we're going to go through, because it's really sort of a really mini version of the third assignment, right? We're sort of looking at taking a GUI, putting some sort of functionality behind it, and then kind of looking to sort of interact with the user and get some really sort of basic event handling set up, right? And so I want to talk about event handling. Basically, when we have these GUIs, right, we want certain things that the users do to sort of trigger other stuff that happens, right? Like you click a button. We know from the previous tut that you click a button and its command gets run. Or maybe we click on this canvas here and we want to draw something like that, right? We call those events and event handling. And that's largely what this tutorial is going to be concerned with. So let's actually let's just dive right into it. So we're going to build an application which allows the user to draw straight lines with their mouse. Cool. So let's start by getting the week10.py file, which I've got up here, right? And let's have a quick look at what we've got here. Class settings frame, extends a frame. Now what have we got inside here? We've packed a label inside it and a button inside it. Okay, and we've got some other methods here that haven't been implemented yet, but that's cool. So label and a button. And then we've got a drawing app, which is looks like it's inheriting from our master, or not inheriting, but is being passed our master. We've set some titles up, and we've got a new thing here, tk.canvas. It's got some extra settings on it. That's essentially, a canvas is kind of like it's a thing you can draw on, essentially. So if you want to put shapes on it or lines on it or something like that, right? It's sort of just like a blank canvas, like, right? But essentially it is what it is. It's something we can draw on. For instance, here, when we want to be drawing lines with the user with their mouse, we're going to actually be using the canvas to draw those lines for us. Something to note here, we've got this settings thing, which is a settings frame, right? This guy. So inside our main app, we've got a canvas. Then we've actually got an instance of that settings frame we created up there. We've packed that. We've also put in a menu bar. Okay, you might need that in your third assignment, so note of how this file and edit stuff's coming up. File, edit. And then some other stuff that we haven't sort of set up yet. And if we look at our main, it's super simple. We're literally just initializing the drawing app. Okay, so let's run this. What do we got? Cool, pretty basic stuff. Oh, we'll get to that in a second, right? We'll see we've got our menu. We've got our canvas, that's this big rectangular thing here. And then we've got this was our settings frame, right? Because if we look at it, I'm actually just gonna snap this guy out of the way quickly. Cool, where'd my app go? Right, because our settings frame had a label packed to the left and then a button packed to the right. So you see they've sort of gone as far as they can. And our canvas, right? And so inside our app, we set up our canvas at the top, tk.top, and then next we packed in the settings app. So that's why it's underneath. And then you'll also notice, so probably pretty hard to avoid, but when I'm moving my mouse around, my console's kind of going a bit nuts in the background there. So let's actually have a look at what it's doing. So we got this line here, right? self._canvas.bind motion self.event motion, right? And so this is the event handling stuff I was talking about. Essentially, this motion event, so see how we're binding to the canvas, right? And the motion event is basically saying every time my mouse moves over the canvas, right? So see, nothing's happening here, but the moment I go onto the canvas, it starts going nuts. So this here is saying bind this function to this event, right? So in other words, every time someone moves their mouse over the canvas, I want you to run this function, self.event motion. Okay, so we're in this class, so let's find the event motion. Cool, here we go. And we can see that event motion is being passed something called an event, right? Basically an event, something happened, right? And it's going to get passed a whole bunch of parameters through there, and we can use those. For instance, at the moment, we are printing out the event X and event Y, okay? So if you look here, you see it's sort of printing out 2 coordinates, and these are actually the coordinates of my mouse on this canvas. So if we start up near the top left, you'll see it's really small, right? Almost 0, 0, because that's the top left. As we move to the right, the X is going to get bigger, right? And as we move down, the Y is going to get bigger. Because the most graphical sort of programs and stuff, 0, 0 is the top left. And then everything gets bigger as we move to the bottom right. Okay? But essentially, yeah, this bind is what's moving around here. And since we bounded to event motion, it's going cool print event X, event Y. Yeah. Okay, and we're gonna tinker with this a bit later on. So that's our basic setup at the moment. What do we got? Modify the program so that moving the cursor over the canvas changes the current position label to the position of the cursor, as in the following example. Okay, so instead of just printing out all that crap in the background, we actually want to update our label on our GUI so that people can see. Hint, you'll need to edit the provided event motion and set position methods. Is that up here? Okay, cool, up here. Set position. Change the current position label to show new XY coordinates. Pass. And we're giving it an X and a Y. Okay, well this one, let's start up here, right? Because this one's actually pretty straightforward. We did some label changing in last week's tune, right? So if you're not familiar with that or you're a bit unsure, maybe go and check out that video again. Shameless self-plug for my YouTube channel, or the YouTube channel. Drop a sub, drop a like, come on guys. But anyway, it's set position, right? It gets past an X and a Y, and we want to change the current position label to show new X and Y. So here's our position label, right? Self._position label. So let's just get rid of this for a moment, right? So if you remember from last week, if we want to change something in one of our widgets, so we're looking at the label, right? We use the config method. Okay. Now in this case, the only thing we actually want to change is the text, right? We, instead of saying current position blank, we want it to say current position and then our current XY, right? So current position. Okay. Now at this point here, you could do a couple of things. You could try and sort of glue some stuff in there with pluses. You could try some other string methods or something. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use the dot format method for a string. Okay. If you recall, what this basically does is it allows us to replace pairs of braces in our string with variables over here. Okay. So in this case, we want it to look like, we want there to be a pair of brackets around, and then we want X, comma, Y. So I'm going to put brace, comma, brace. Okay. I actually might do this on 2 lines purely so that it actually fits on 1 line and I don't have to change the viewing on my idle. Okay, so let's just set some, what are we calling this? Label stir. Oh geez, that's a terrible name, but whatever. Okay, and we want it to look like this, right? So now we're going to come down here and we're going to call label stir.format. And then now what do we want to pass in? Well, we've been told that we've been given an X and a Y in this function, right? So we're just going to pass in X and Y. Okay? Because essentially what should happen here is if we call this method, we should have label stir, current position is this, and then when the dot format comes through, it should replace this guy with our X and this guy here with our Y. Okay? Now it's up to us to actually be able to call this function correctly later on, but in theory this should work, and I'll actually see if I can quickly set up an example. Actually, we probably won't be able to. Let's probably try and actually call this properly. So we wanted to edit the set position and the event motion methods, right? Because in order to actually trigger this set position method, when do we got to think about when we would want this to go off, and we only want this to change when we've actually moved our mouse, right? Because we want it to change when we move our mouse over the canvas. That's when we want the label to update. So this guy over here, who was bound to the motion event, this is the guy where we're going to want to be sort of fiddling around with. Okay, so at the moment we're just printing this stuff. Not too useful. But what we want to be doing is we want to somehow be calling this set position method from here, right? So self.setPosition method, right? And we can see that this event X and event Y guy, right? These are, it's giving us the X and Y coordinates. So since we want our set position to take an X and a Y, let's pass that through. event.y. Okay. Now let's try running this and see what happens. I gotta stop closing the shell when I do this. Where's my GUI? Oh, look at all that red. Woo. Okay. Drawing app object has no attribute set position. Okay. Where is this set position guy? He's up here. He's in the settings frame, right? Set position does not directly belong to the drawing app class. Okay, so we can't self.setPosition this guy. What we got to think about is where is he coming from, right? Oh, geez, I tried to delete something. Oh, yeah, true. I accidentally closed the GUI when I still wanted it. Okay. If the label belongs to this guy here, right? Which, if you recall from the start of the video, is actually a settings frame, right? And that makes sense because our settings frame is this guy here where we set the set position guy. So instead of directly going from the drawing app, we have to think about, well, we're in our overall drawing app, and now we want to get from our drawing app to the settings frame, sort of component of our drawing app, and then to its label, okay? So where's the settings frame? Well, here's our settings frame, right? We put him in and we packed him. So we've got our self._settings, and this guy, since he is a settings frame, he has a .setPosition. So we can call self settings set position event x event y. Okay, let's try this one now. Oh, a whole bunch more red. What had I done? Unknown option current position 486254. Self.tk.splitlist. Oh my. Oh, this was not planned. Let's actually try and do a bit of debugging here. Set position, label stir, self._position label. That looks all right. What are we doing down here? Self._settings .set position. Trace back. What have we got here? Return self.func in event motion. Line 39 and set position. Label stir dot format xy. Self.config. Ah, here we go. So if you remember how config works, right? We have to pass in what we're going to change. So in this case, we want to change the text. So I forgot to pass in this guy. Okay, so always read the stack trace because it's telling me here that something's gone wrong in the config, and it can be kind of hard to read these, especially when you accidentally print out like 50 million of them in a row. But definitely a good exercise to sort of figure out, work your way backwards from where it went wrong, right? Because it's set position, config, and then it's finally told me that something's gone wrong in the config, so we go and check that out, and then I can find your mistake that way. So let's run this one now, okay? Hey, look at that, our little label's changing, but we've still got all that business in the background, so I'm going to get rid of that print statement. Boom. 0, 0. Some thick numbers here. Yeah, sweet. Okay. Easy, first time. Okay. What was next? Next, modify the settings frame class. Okay, I go over here. So that if the preview on button is clicked, I'm guessing that's this guy, it will turn gray and change its text to preview off. And if clicked again, it will go back to being green with preview on. Okay, so some sort of toggle. Also write the method is preview on to return true or false depending on the preview setting. And we've got a hint down here. Mouse event occurs, the X and Y attributes tell us where the mouse is. Cool, we've already used that. String.format method. Oh, cool, I already used that. Head of the game. To keep track of whether the preview option is on, create an extra Boolean attribute of the class. Cool. This is important, guys. Your sort of go-to instinct on something like this, in terms of toggling the button, might be to look at the state of the button itself. So being like, what's the color of my background on my button? Oh, it's gray. So let's make it green, right? This isn't really the approach you want to take. You don't want to sort of be looking at the GUI to figure out what's going on. What you want to know is you actually want to set up what's going on yourself, right? And then you want the GUI to react to that. So you want to have some sort of knowledge being like, oh, cool, preview mode is off. And then the GUI goes, oh, cool, preview mode is off. I should make the button gray, right? You don't want the opposite to happen. You don't want to be like, oh, the button's gray, therefore preview mode must be off. That's sort of the backwards thinking. And it's really unhelpful later on. You really want to have a clear idea of the state of your machine, of your sort of program without looking at the GUI, as if the GUI was never there. And that's what this hint is about. Create an extra Boolean attribute of the class to determine whether the preview option is on. So let's do just that. Self.preview. It's Boolean, and I'm going to set it to be true because I think by default it started as on. Yeah, it was on. Okay. Where are we on? Here. Okay. Write the method isPreview to return true or false depending on the preview setting. That's this guy. Okay. Well, this one's actually really, really easy, assuming we keep this in Turk, right? Because this is the guy that tells us true or false if our preview's on. So if we want to know if the preview's on, let's just spit him back out. Missed out my dot. Okay. Now here's the guy, toggle preview. So let's have a bit of a think about this. We've got two situations. Our preview is on, in which case we want to turn it gray, or our preview is off, in which case we want to turn it green. Okay, so super simple setup here is just if statement, right? We got two cases. Let's just if else it out. So if self.preview is true, in other words, we are in preview mode, that means our button is green, right? So we want to turn it gray. Now, how do we change what's happening with our widgets? Exact same way we did last time, the .config method. So we want to be editing this button here, right? So we're going to .config the button. Now, what do we want? We want to change two parts of the button. We want to change its text from preview on to preview off, and we want to change its background color from green to gray. So we want to change the text to preview off, and we want to change the background color to gray. Okay. What about? Oh yeah, I haven't. Oh, I always try and plan the stuff out ahead, and then I try and run it, and that's terrible. Okay, so in theory, our preview is on. We should come into here, and we should change with this button. Awesome, awesome. Okay, so let's keep going. We basically want to do the same thing in the else, right? But the opposite. So let's turn. Why is my indentation gone weird here? Okay, cool. Now we want the preview to be on, and we want our background color to be green. Okay, so toggle off. Okay, it's not going back green. Why is it not going back green? Well, every time we come through this toggle, right, our preview is true because we never change it. So this is a pretty easy fix. We want to always keep track of the state of our program, right? That's what I was talking about before. And since we've got this variable here, if we want to toggle it and it was true, whoops, doodle, let's make it false, right? We know we're going into off mode, so let's update our model as we go. When I talk about the model, I'm saying the sort of underlying variables and stuff we've got here that tell us what state our program's in, right? I'm gonna refer to that as the model from now on, because that is what it's called later. You'll find you'll hear a lot more about the model in future courses as well, and I'll try and keep using that terminology just to sort of get you in the mood for that. Okay. So in theory, we should be able to toggle now, right? Because we've swapped to false after we've turned our text, and then we should be able to swap back. Okay. Cool. So that's a perfectly valid solution. However, I don't like doing this way, because we can actually streamline this ever so slightly and write some code that's just a tad sexier, essentially. So what are we doing regardless of whether we go through this if or this else? We want self.preview to toggle, right? We want it to go from true to false or false to true. In other words, we want self.preview to be whatever it's not, okay? So instead of putting in two sort of very similar statements in the if and the else, we can actually bring outside here, or I guess it would almost make more sense to do it before, right? Actually, wait, no, it wouldn't at all. Don't listen to me. It'd make more sense to do it afterwards, otherwise it wouldn't work. But we want self._preview to change, right? We want it to be the opposite. Now, since it's always true or false, we can actually do this. So if it's true, become not true, and if it's false, become not false. Ooh. And that's working exactly the same way. Click, click, click. Okay. Cool. So that's the first part of the shoot done. All this find my position. Okay, that's actually about 20 minutes now. So I'm actually going to call this for part 1, and then we'll come back in a few minutes. We'll come back immediately and do part 2, right? And try and move into the actual line drawing section of this. So as always, if you've got any questions, feel free to drop anything in the comment section here or to post on Piazza. And otherwise, I will hopefully see you guys back for part 2.